Welcome to today's episode of Cameron's Conversations. So I thought I would start with something that's, I wouldn't say super controversial, but probably a little bit controversial because it kind of goes against the grain of what people normally think when it comes to weight loss. And it's that willpower is not the missing piece for most people. Most people want to lose weight. Most people do want to make a change. But the problem they have is that they're in this vicious loop where they have tried to lose weight, maybe had a bit of success, regained it, or they've tried to lose weight and just completely failed at it after a relatively short period of time, so many times now that they have absolutely no belief that they can do it. And what starts to happen is that willpower excuse starts to come in all the time, or sort of reasoning is probably a better way of describing it, so it's not an excuse. But what they do is they start to say things like, oh, I just need to stick to it. I just need to have more willpower. I just need to make better decisions. I just need to do that. And it's always about having more willpower or just sticking to it, or I just need to get in the right mindset for it. And that stuff all sounds really good. And it kind of makes sense at surface level because you think, well, if I had more willpower, I'd be able to stick to my diet better. But the question is, if you want weight loss, right, and if you are in that position where your t-shirts aren't feeling super comfortable and you don't feel great in your own skin and all the rest of it, right, everything's a little bit tight in the wrong places, that kind of stuff, well, the want to change is there, right? So where does that willpower come from? What changes day to day or week to week that suddenly kind of motivates you or drives you so that your willpower comes and sticks around? Because obviously great having willpower for an hour, but the problem with food is that you are making multiple decisions across the day, right? That's why, it's easy to maybe get things right in the morning and then by afternoon it's all fallen to bits. So what's going to change? Well, nothing is, right? It's not, you don't spontaneously find willpower. And this is where I think a lot of people go wrong, because they are constantly telling themselves they just need to try harder or they need more willpower. And part of that might be true, where maybe they do need to try harder, but they need to try harder as in put more effort in the right places. Just telling yourself that you need more willpower is not the solution. Probably, for most people at least, it's going to be starting with some structure. So, one of the things that I think is super useful to think about is that if you want to find more willpower and to get to that point where you feel a bit more committed to your goals and you're a bit more consistent, what you need is some wins under your belt, right? You need to get some small wins where you feel more organized, you feel more on top of it, you're maybe even starting to see some movement on the scales, you're starting to see a difference in clothes. Now, the problem with that is that can't happen instantly, right? Especially the changes in body composition. You might see a drop on the scales the first couple of days you start dieting. That's quite possible. As soon as you kind of make a bit of a change to your nutrition, you can see minor changes on the scales, sure. But the kind of changes in how your t-shirt fits, it's probably not going to happen within 5-6 days, right? What we can win on is this structure thing. And what I mean by that is when people talk about sort of trying hard in the willpower bit, if instead they focus that on, okay, I need to get more organized with food, and they started to implement that, the willpower often follows suit. So I'll give you an example. Most people, when you kind of look at their nutrition, they follow similar trends, and everyone's a bit different, right? But a lot of the time people struggle with snacking in the evening. Then they also probably struggle with snacking throughout the day. They struggle with food choices at lunches because a lot of the time if you're in office or in work, you're just kind of grabbing something on the go, which creates its own set of problems because then often those meals aren't that filling, or you're not making the choices even within a meal deal that are going to fill you up as much as they possibly can do. So you're always battling against hunger and kind of disorganization. You're basically waking up in the morning and hoping that you are able to make the right decisions from start to finish. Because the problem with nutrition is if you make 3 or 4 decisions that aren't quite in line with your goals in a day, you knock your progress out. You have an extra couple of biscuits, you maybe go for the higher calorie sandwich, you have a packet of crisps, then, maybe in the evening you reach for some chocolate. Well, all of a sudden, you're not in a deficit anymore. It sounds a bit blunt, right? But that's reality. 3 or 4 minor decisions and, well, you're stuck, right? You're not making any progress. You might arrest your weight gain if you're changing some things, right? But that's not going to be enough to make progress. So what we want to think about is the structure piece. So what does that actually look like? Well, if you take 5 minutes now, set a timer on your phone and plan out what your breakfast, lunch, dinner for the next day are, and then you plan in 2 snacks for the day. Might be kind of small things, might be a piece of fruit, it might be something else that's like quite filling, so it might be a protein pouch, protein yogurt, or something of that nature. But you plan out the next day. 2 things are going to happen. One, you're going to suffer less decision fatigue that next day, because the moment you wake up and you've got this weight loss goal and you're determined to get after it, you've also got a plan, right? You've got this breakfast planned out, you've got this lunch planned out, you've got this dinner planned out, and most of the time we're pretty pragmatic about it, right? The way our brains work, we're not going to plan to make a beautiful like dinner that takes an hour and a half to cook on a Monday night, right? We're not going to do that. We're going to say, okay, well, I'll grab that from the shop, so I have that for dinner on Monday night, and I'm going to get this from, the shop. If I get a meal deal, I'll probably pick this particular sandwich or this particular wrap because it's a little bit more filling, a bit more protein, and I'll also maybe get a protein drink with that because that's included in the meal deal, and I'll have a piece of fruit with it. What starts to happen is you plan ahead so you've got less decision fatigue. So that's the first thing that's a huge advantage. The second thing comes from motivation, and this is where you start to have a bit more willpower. Is if you spend just 5 minutes with that timer and you let it run down and you use it to plan out as much of tomorrow and maybe a little bit of the next day as you can, what happens is you also wake up feeling organised, feeling more in control than usual with your nutrition, which then gives you this little spark of motivation. And this is what I talk about, having early wins under your belt. That is a much more pragmatic approach to it than you saying to yourself, oh, I just need to have more willpower. And it's a Thursday when I'm filming this, so I'll just start on Monday, right? So I'll have more willpower then. Like, will you? Really? Like, of course not. You're not going to. Nothing's going to change. So having that mentality of being more organized is probably hugely to your benefit. And it sounds a bit blunt, and this is a bit of sort of weight loss or fat loss, tough love. A lot of the time when I'm speaking to just about anyone when they first start with their nutrition, there is little to no structure. Not always, and there's definitely exceptions to that. I definitely have people come in the door that have some, like a little bit more structure than others. But on average, one of the reasons I see people struggling the most is because there is no structure. If I ask them what they tend to go for at breakfast that fills them up really well, they're kind of like, and they have to think about it, right? That's a problem from the off. Because actually, when you wake up in the morning, you've not had the best sleep, you had a really busy day the day before, and it's a Friday morning, if you have to make not a super difficult choice, but a more difficult choice than you would like at that time in the morning, are you going to pick right? Are you going to pick right when it gets to lunch, when you just want to be done for the week? Are you going to pick right in the evening when it's, again, like Friday night, you're knackered and you just fancy takeaway? Well, probably not, right? So getting really structured with your nutrition will help. And when I say really structured, people often think of like, rigidity and, a lack of flexibility. The reality is you get to choose still, right? You're just planning ahead for the next day. You are making tomorrow's version of you an easier day for them, right? You're making it much easier for them. If I plan out my meals for tomorrow's Cameron does not have to, it's a bit weird speaking about myself in third person, but tomorrow's Cameron doesn't have to spend this energy thinking about it. And I can't stress how important that is. I had an unbelievably busy day yesterday where I was at the laptop for like 10, 11 hours, probably about 11, 12 hours, a really, really long day, still managed to fit in like 13,000 steps, still got to the gym, but I worked pretty much all day outside of those 2 things. And the reality is that if I had not planned out my food, if I did not have what I needed in the fridge, I would have struggled. And I've been looking after my nutrition and working on it for years now, and I still would have struggled a bit more. So that can be a really, really good place to start, because just getting a little bit organized, as I say, 1, takes away a bit of decision fatigue, and 2, it also makes you feel more organized and more motivated. And that's often one of the things I start with clients when they first come into coaching is, okay, let's look at your week. How can we make you feel more on top of things? What small things can we plan in? Can we be a bit more structured with our weekly food shop? Can we look to have a bit of a plan for food over the next few days? And I'll give them suggestions and we'll figure out what works best for them, for their preferences and tastes and eating pattern, because everyone eats in a slightly different way. And we start to structure that out, and it starts to feel quite habitual. And of course, what happens is if you're then tracking calories, it's also easier to track your calories because what you can do is track in advance. And also because it's a bit more organized, it tends to feel a lot easier than just like, oh, what did I have earlier today? Oh, I can't remember. And it's all just a bit like in the moment and winging it. And the one thing I will say is this, is that in all the years that I have worked on my own weight loss, spoken to people about weight loss and nutrition, and then obviously in all the years I've coached clients, winging it rarely works. If you have a lot of structure and then you start to become more relaxed over time, especially when you're in maintenance and you've got good habits and routines, yeah, it'll absolutely work. But when you've got none of those things, winging it just leads to the same old thing, which is failing at dieting, basically. And I think it is a little bit of tough love to kind of like reflect on, how organized are you right now? Because if the answer is you have no idea what you're going to have for dinner tonight or what you're going to have for lunch tomorrow and breakfast and so on and so forth, you have no idea about the snacks. When it comes to the weekend, you're just going to wing the whole weekend too, which is, let's be honest, the time that 95% of us struggle the most. If you completely wing it at all meals, rather than maybe say, oh, well, Saturday afternoon I'm out for lunch, not sure where we're going, well, I'll plan out my breakfast and my dinner and maybe one snack, well, that still makes you feel much more organised, and it makes you much more likely to stick to it than if you're just winging it and you get to lunch and you think, oh, well, I have no idea what to have for dinner, I'll just have whatever, I can't be bothered. I've been out for lunch, what's the point? Right? That's where you slip into incredibly quickly. So I do think that if you are sitting there being like, oh, I just need to get in the right mindset and I need to have more willpower, nothing changes if nothing changes. If you start to get really organised, if you do a good weekly food shop, if you have more fruit in the house, if you maybe limit some of the snacks you have in the house when you do your weekly food shop, and so you don't have to say no to things as often. I mean, you're always going to have to say no to something, sure, but as often. If you do those things, if you plan a couple of days in advance, like, a lot of those things don't actually take that long. You're probably doing a food shop anyway, right? You just spend 10 minutes being a bit more organised. You spend 5 minutes planning out the next day and suddenly you're not thinking about what to eat all bloody day, which is just a nightmare. And I cannot be bothered doing that all the time. I think when you've got a busy day, there's nothing better than just waking up knowing what you're going to have breakfast, lunch and dinner. It just takes the stress out of it. That's the mentality I want you to shift into. Then that's when the willpower piece of this comes back in, is yes, you still need to stick to it. And yes, you need more willpower to do that, or you need willpower to do that, but motivation's higher, right? If you've got things all planned out and someone offers you a snack, you're not in that kind of position where you're starving and you immediately say yes. You're kind of like, well, actually, I've got a good lunch planned. You're more inclined to say no. You won't say no 100% of the time, right? But your chances of saying no and making the right decisions are much, much higher. And that's where that willpower starts to build. And I see this with clients a lot, where they get farther and farther and they're like, actually, I'm not that bothered about that thing. And the reason is because they've got meals planned out, they're full because the meals they've got planned are actually filling. All these things start to fall in line, so it feels easier, and they've already started to win because they've started to lose weight. They see a difference in the way their clothes fit, so the willpower starts to come with it. You kind of make a more conscious trade-off of actually, no, I can leave that because it's not worth it for me because I've got this goal. That gets easier, but what won't happen is if you are sat here after another week of struggling with your diet and not really getting anywhere and kind of binning it off after Tuesday, and it's Thursday now and you're just like, you've had 2 days of just completely losing the plot with it and just not being focused on it at all, like really getting that structure in place for next week, getting organized, getting that food there might be the simplest but most impactful thing that you can do. And it's also going to make all the other bits around it, like calorie tracking, much easier. So there's just some kind of thoughts about willpower. It's just something that came up because it comes up so often. I was speaking to another coach about it basically, and we're talking about this, how it's such a common thing for people to be like, oh, I need to get into the right mindset before I start coaching, for example, or whatever. And then a few months down the line, they're like, actually, I'm still struggling, but I think I should just start coaching. It's like, yeah, because actually having that structure, that accountability is the thing that then brings that willpower into place and gets you into that mindset. It's not going to spontaneously happen. So there's a little bit of a challenge for you. Spend 5 minutes mapping things out for the next day and be honest. How organized are you with your nutrition? Because even now, if I have a week where my nutrition's poorer and I'm not making as good choices as normal, 90% of the time it's because I'm less organised. There might be other factors, things can happen, your freezer can break and that's life, but also a lot of the time it's just because you're not that organised and it's making life much, much harder. Anyway, if you are struggling with your weight loss and you need a bit of a hand and you want to get one-to-one support with me on how to kick on and finally get into the shape you want to be in good time ahead of the summer months, then the link to one-to-one coaching is in the show notes, and I'll speak to you soon.